are the last witnesses of the centuries-long Turkish presence in the Balkans. Direct witnesses of the peace climate our ancestors established in the Balkan geography. And then what? With the start of the '93 war, as the peace environment began to deteriorate, their ancestors were uprooted from their lands, properties, and even they are those who left their graves there and came to the Kalikratya port with a one-way ticket, never to return. The exchanges who took their first step into Anatolia from Kalikratya port. To get to know them better and to convey their stories more effectively, we asked their children and grandchildren about them.
Yes, so they were farming, village life. They exhibited the same lifestyle when they came here. They also engaged in agriculture here. They experienced a lot of hardship back in the day. They had larger lands there. Here, they struggled to survive on a smaller piece of land. Well, when they had many children, they worked very selflessly to feed them. They experienced a lot of hardship.
On January 30th, 1923, an agreement and protocol regarding the exchange of Turkish and Greek populations were signed between the state representatives of Turkey and Greece in Lausanne. According to this, the Greeks in Istanbul and the Muslims in Eastern Thrace are to be excluded. Those belonging to the Orthodox faith living in Turkey. Orthodox. It was decided that the Orthodox and Muslims outside of Eastern Thrace would be exchanged mutually.
This already happened gradually during the war. That is, during the years of the Balkan Wars. First Balkan War, second the Balkan War, and during the years of the First World War continuously. From Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia to the interior of Anatolia, there was Turkish migration.
The grandparents do farming, they do animal husbandry. They set up tents in some way in those places. They talked about them to us. They would say,
back then we had 200 places there, 200 sheep, and we had a grocery store. Everything was left there.
Farming, it was the same in Konya, farming like this. There were animals. Of course, there were no tractors back then. With them.
As he said, in Greece they have always been involved in farming, livestock and agriculture. According to what he said, they have quite a lot of land there, with nearly 3,000 small livestock, and close to 4,000 large livestock. It corresponds to quite a large family there.
Our family had 250 sheep, 50 animals, and my great-grandfather was the chief there. He left quite a few of his animals. Whatever they found at home, like blankets, they took straight to the riverbank.
Also, my father's family was there. My grandfather built a 5-story house. He invested all his wealth there. When they came here, they were left impoverished, of course. They had no money left to spend here. My mother's father was wealthier. For example, he was a landowner in Thessaloniki. He also came to Oventia and he was a landowner there as well.
Grandfather had a plot of land where 500 sheep used to graze inside. And every Eid al-Adha morning, I would count them. The houses opposite the mosque. An entrance they made in life. There, 9 tables, those coming out of the mosque, wouldn't go home without eating.
Gas, salt, sugar. You produce everything else at home. No knitwear, no clothes. There, I was just at the family. In the family, some women do it more. They do weaving. They used to weave all the clothes. We wore...
Grandmother says, oh, what they used to do, there were plenty of chestnuts. We would fill the rooms, she says. She says we would go gather and eat them. She says we would even select from the room. That's how abundant they were.
They also have old conversations with each other when they went to chat and gossip. Since there were mostly chestnuts were roasted or boiled and offered as a treat.
There was a stream in between, and it became possible to go and see it. It was destined On the upper side of the stream, there were 40 Greeks, and on the lower side, there were 80 Turks.
I always question my mother, Mom. How was it, the places you lived? Just the same, my son, she said. Come see Elbasan, see Çakil, such tiny villages. Are there Greeks? Yes, she said. We had Greek neighbors, she said. We had no problems with them, she said.
So they were content there, where they stood. So there was unity as well. Whatever the name of a country was, people would all gather in one village, like this. We would visit each other, we would meet, we would invite each other to our weddings, eat and drink. They said we got along well.
There is no problem with the citizens. If you don't have a political opinion, there's nothing. Everyone is looking for this place. Those there, ours and they are looking for that place. When you say homeland, being separated from the place you live means a lot.
While my aunt was coming with her child in her arms from the opposite side. I'm telling what my aunt recounted. There are some people coming, meaning they will also board that boat and they will get on the ship. The one coming notices there's a basket on their arm. She's coming, but of course, my aunt is around 17 years old. She embraces my aunt, saying, "Take it, my child." Well, a chicken has 13 chicks. We had very good days. You will also have good days here. She says, "You will remember me, hugs and kisses."
Of course, when they came here, when the people here went there, they went to my grandfather's place, like friends, to their homeland. They said, if you are going to stay here, if you are going to live here, they explained the conditions here. Those who went, in other words, they parted like friends. They parted like friends with those here. As far as I heard from my grandfather, in fact, my grandfather always used to say here, he would say, winter comes later here. The foreigners told us, he would say, don't take off your vest or jacket.
In a place where they played games for years. My father injured his school friend's head. But after my father came here, he became a journalist. He comes here after becoming a journalist. When my father comes home from work, he calls and says, "Come, I have something to tell you." He brings a surprise when he sits next to his friend. My father says, "Journalist, do you recognize me?" He asks. He says, "I don't recognize you." "Look," he says, "I have a scar on my head. Can you recognize me from this?" He asks him. My father is surprised and says, "What?" He shows his head. There is a scar on it. "Haven't you recognized me yet?" he says in a sermon. "Weren't you the one who injured my head?" When he says that, my father and that brother of ours, let's say our friend, he says, "Let's be brothers." After that, they hug each other. There's such an anecdote.
They asked us for something like this. Whether it's 80 years later, 90 years later, 70 years later, I don't remember the exact date, but at least 80 years later, would you send us to Thessaloniki, where we were born, grew up, smelled, experienced our first memories, and spent our childhood? It pierced into me like an arrow. I immediately told my friends, I told our team of great exchanges, and they formed a team. We did what was necessary, along with the people. They took with them, they organized a nice tour of Thessaloniki.
Because they were old, my father had another friend in this area, Mr. Murai. Together with him, the mayor sent them to Greece. From our special menu, accompanied by one doctor and one caregiver, they stayed there for 3 to 4 days. So he couldn't express his satisfaction. The man, he became so satisfied.
We are going, they are coming, we are meeting, we are talking, but our municipalities, sister city, relationship, what we want to create.
Thanks to our mayor, who is sensitive about this issue, he frequently consulted with us on these matters. Of course, since he is a descendant of an exchangee, he is such a brother regarding the municipality's matter. We suggested it would be good, logical, and that relationships would improve.
He says, let it be a bridge. The municipality is involved in carrying out friendship activities and cultural activities in this regard. We also decided, we got our decision from the council, the largest one being Neo Propondida, and we established a sister city relationship with Neo Kalikratya.
I went to their weddings, I went to their ceremonies. On August 15th, did the Greeks say Jesus appeared up there, or was it the Virgin Mary? I don't know. They invited us. I, my grandchild, the back, we all went. They have a village, 14 villages come together. We participated in their nights there. They said, you are not Turkish. We went there in shorts and all, you know. They said, you are Turkish. We showed our ID cards. We got up and danced to their tunes. That's when they realized we were Turkish.
Thus, with their foods, music, and cultures intertwined, two nations can certainly come together one day. However, unfortunately, the conditions of the time separated them from their lands and also from each other, them. When the difficulties brought by the political conditions of the day were compounded by the gangs formed on both sides, heart-wrenching stories filled with sorrow and pain were also recorded in history, unfortunately.
There, extreme nationalists raid Turkish villages, kidnap children, demand gold, and so on. Similarly, there were such things from us as well, from the Turks. They were also fighting against them.
A soldier who came is informed to shoot my father, is being notified. He is notified. But when the wrong man is pointed out, the man misunderstands, and they attach the bayonet to that child. My father escapes from there, and after entering the forest, he becomes like a vine. He climbs onto that tree, wrapping himself with the vine, and stays there for a night.
We say, always. He says we were running to the forest, to the middle of nowhere. He says we were under pressure. My shoes were lame on both of his feet. He says I would try to leave, but couldn't, and would stay at home. He says everyone else was running away. He says the gang members were putting pressure on us. They were trying to take whatever we had. He says they were killing those they caught.
The Greeks were torturing them a lot back then. My mother-in-law used to tell us, she would say, my sister was older. We used to hide in the chimney. She would tell us, they even took her father, and he never came back. I mean, they probably killed him since he never returned. They came, both of her sisters came here.
My grandmother and such were coming with horses. They had saddlebags. The horses' saddlebags were full of gold and such. But to the Greeks, when they blocked my father's way, they said, we will block it. They told their children. My grandmother pleaded, please don't touch my children. She gave the gold in the saddlebags as it was. To the Greeks.
Even one of my uncles was a baby. Alter was a baby. They are escaping, crying, crying. Uncle is crying. Of course, we don't know. They said, let's throw him into the stream. The baby, Alter baby, you know, he's crying. They'll hear us and catch us. He stopped. When they said, the baby stopped crying and didn't open his mouth again. As if God told him to be quiet, you know?
There was a neighbor who existed. That neighbor apparently had a beautiful daughter-in-law. They practically made the daughter-in-law a hunchback. They did something to her back, made her look old. One of the Greek soldiers set his eyes on her. After a certain point, fortunately, their commander was a compassionate man. He roughed up that soldier quite a bit.
The soldiers were taking young girls away. After that, there was quite a bit of torture. In fact, soldiers raided the home of my great-grandmother's mother, raided their homes. She had a baby. From what they told, they killed her. While she was holding the baby to my grandmother, the baby remained in the mother's arms. They didn't do anything to the baby. They killed the baby. The baby was left behind. Of course, she grew up and she is our aunt. After that, she had a belt around her waist. They took that belt and tortured her like that.
The little ones were running them. She had a baby in her arms. She left her baby under a bush to save herself. They were still chasing them with bayonets from behind. Them.
I had told you about Uncle Kamal the blacksmith. There were heirlooms from his grandfather. There were containers, copper and silver containers. He wrapped a few around his waist. He even wrapped his wife around his waist. Young people, eventually at some point, they identify these, they take those containers and pots. He crushes them with the butt of the rifle. He cried a lot over it. He cried while telling the story too. He was telling them,
in the middle of the night, something like this comes to me. Now he says, son, what just came to my mind? I said, what came to your mind? He said, ours. He says, we used to lower our curtains in such a way that no light would leak outside. And footsteps are heard at night as the Greek Palikaryas pass by. Hey, Kipriani, you know, there are Turkish lambs here to be slaughtered. He says, I hear this, I'm nursing your aunt with one hand, and in the other hand I have the weapon they called a revolver back then. He says, I have the weapon in my hand. The infidel could come at any moment, I'm waiting. He says, in such fear, if you can sleep, sleep. They lived such a life.
My grandmother used to tell, they would come. Those Greek gangs knew the houses. For example, they would advance, intertwined with the other Greeks there, together intertwined. They would go to them, they would come, look at my grandmother's houses and find no one. That's how they managed. They saved themselves. There are Greeks there. I mean, with the Greeks there. But there were gangs.
There are records of attacks on Turkish groups on the road, especially for looting purposes. Because they were not allowed to carry cash with them, on the grounds that they were hiding cash and jewelry, we know that there were attempts and acts of looting against the Turks.
10 families with horse-drawn carriages were on the road when they encountered the gang. The Greek gang, demands money from them. Nico helps your grandparents. Nico says they are going to pick tobacco from our side. My grandmother gets up at midnight to bake bread in the oven, and after taking the bread out of the oven, she gives 2 loaves of bread to the gang, a large loaf.
there was another important issue that caught my attention there. As the mayor, while speaking, they kept the events. So, deep inside. They kept the events so warmly inside them that they could recount them with the exact date, hour, and date. They were so affected that they could say, on this day at this hour we were here. We got hit with a baton here and over there. We were treated like animals. We were left hungry, we were left without water. They would describe it in detail.
If we say there were only Greek gangs, that would also be wrong in a way. The region was an area where Greece, Bulgaria, and different ethnic groups each had their own rule. There were separate gangs, so these inevitably affected the local people. They were creating oppression.
Bulgarian massacres gained momentum. The citizens are desperately seeking a force because they have no weapons. They apply to Bekir Sami Bey Pasha and receive 600 weapons which are distributed to the people. A militia force is formed there, and they inflicted heavy losses on the Bulgarian gangs. Our Turks also suffered heavy losses there. During that time,
one of them was already abandoned. One of my grandfathers, he was abandoned. He stayed there. He didn't come with us. He stayed in Greece. Then he came. He escaped. He also came illegally later.
Even in this Kamilova, Hüseyin Yılmaz, Aycanlar, grandfathers in the village of the Vodkans. I listened again from Uncle Seyfi. He said the Greek priest came and said, "This mosque is calling the adhan. Let's bring a bell to this minaret and place it." "What are you saying? Which mosque are you placing it on?" "Yes," he said, "don't talk." He attempted to attack him. At that moment, Hussein's son was coming. Ali Riza's grandfather, his father, he said, "My son, Lion, Aslan, was Aiken's grandfather." "Aslan, why are you standing there? Look." He said, "The infidel is attacking father." Immediately, Hussein pulled him away and stabbed him. After that, he fled to the mountains, and until the migration, he never returned until he came here. They wandered around more and came here. They established Kamilova.
My uncle raided the house. He used to talk about my late mother. They did something nice. The Greeks also raided. There was a gang group, he says. We would always disturb them.
My grandfather's father-in-law, was a member of the Didim, is his name, came from Albanian back then. In the war, everyone ended up somewhere. Yeah, how they sent us from Konya, Karaman to there. We stayed for 300 years. That grandfather was very fierce. He was Albanian. He killed a lot of Greeks there. His son-in-law, my uncle, it was so strong. To my grandpa, Islam grandpa. "Have you gone now?" They said, "There's a shortcut from our village to go with a cart. He is calling you if you want." He told me they would do something because they used to call Turks like this and kill them. My grandmother, in the month of August, set the table, and he came before October ended. My father was 40 days old in my grandmother's arms. The other children were older. I will show you when we go. The place where he was killed, there 13 people jumped on him. They gouged out his eye, boiled his skin out of spite for his father-in-law. They inflicted suffering on my grandfather. The news reaches my grandmother. The Turks take my grandmother from there and bring her to that place. At that time, gold used to pass through my grandfather's purse. He also had a gold watch. They took it off and gave it to my grandmother. They buried your grandfather there.
Although the ability of hundreds of thousands of people to travel hundreds of kilometers in an organized manner under the transportation conditions of the time was guaranteed by the Treaty of Lausanne, it occurred in hundreds of incidents that could not be controlled. Aside from the oppression experienced from gangs, the harsh weather conditions, lack of resources, and epidemics turned the journey back to the homeland into a challenging ordeal that required great sacrifices.
The wealthy came with mule carts, the slightly less wealthy with horse carts. The third generation wealthy came with ox carts. According to what ours said, they arrived in 4 days. With a horse cart, it takes 6 days, and with an ox cart, it can take 26 days to cover the distance. The road conditions back then,
They endured hardships, troubles, hunger, thirst. Those who died on the road, the deceased being thrown into the sea, all of these happened before our eyes.
They didn't bring too many belongings, just quilts. They wrapped their valuable items inside the quilts. That's how they brought them here. Under those conditions,
they made small gold pieces. They placed them under my parents' feet. When they were coming to Turkey,
what they went through was immense. They were telling the neighbors, when they had many children, they could take one, but they couldn't take another. Mothers were devastated. There were those who lost their children in this way. They suffered great pains.
From the village of Achibeiram, from their cars, or horse-drawn carriages, Bekus carts, and animals, they walked from the village of Achibeiram to Thessaloniki's. Inside, at the foot of the castle, they arrived there. There, they wait for the ship being for about 3 to 4 months.
The speed at which these ships traveled under the condition of that day. Transport capacities were limited, so there was inevitably a waiting period for people there. A waiting period was formed. That is, according to some of our elders, it took 3 months, 4 months, or according to some 2 months, 1 month.
4 Greek ships and 2 Turkish ships are departing from Kalikratya port. This is to ensure the exchange happens as soon as possible. The names of the departing ships are also significant. One is the Mustafa Kemal Pasha steamer, and the other is the İsmet Ünlü steamer. So, this is also an interesting thing, and the names of their own steamers are also important. Republic steamer, Independent steamer, Freedom. Gülcema is a well-known steamer. Altay steamer, Turan steamer. So, even the names of the steamers actually reveal something.
There used to be inns there in Thessaloniki. Your elders would tell, there, he said, all our elders have died. While coming from there by ship, on the way, he said, the great elders always jump into the sea when they die. He said, we came here, he said.
Exchange is a torment. It is a suffering with his 3 sisters, my father, boards the ship. At that time, my aunt named Bahriye, who was 6 years old, complains. She says, Mom, my stomach hurts a lot. You are leaving a country, you have no country. You are leaving a country where you lived for 400 years. In this dreamlike state, my grandmother doesn't even hear Bahriye saying, Mom, my stomach hurts. My grandmother, my daughter, and so on. They get into the car, they board the ship. Such a violent storm. Such a violent storm that the girl dies a day and a half later.
They stayed at sea for a week, and even on their way back, my mother's sibling passed away. And they threw them into the sea.
He says we endured a lot of suffering. Some say we couldn't find a place to sleep, they say. The children were vomiting, he says. Everyone was afraid of the sea, they say. In other words, they came here through great hardships.
My grandfather died on the ship. He arrived in Turkey and then he died. He got off the ship and died. He never got to see these places.
Now, they informed the ship's management. They said, bring the funeral here. In a found bedsheet, my grandmother wraps my aunt around the baby. At 6 years old, they take her and say, put her down. They put her down. He instructed his staff, bring me a piece of iron weighing 2 to 3 kilos. You know, they put a weight on the dead so they don't swell. My grandfather thought they were going to do something like that. While the relatives were explaining there, he says he saw something white flying into the sea. He says, I looked back to see what it was, but it was gone. What happened? What happened to the weight?
She used to say, let them not die on the ship. Let them not throw my child into the sea. Let them not die on the ship. Let them not throw my child into the sea.
My grandmother said, what did they do to Bahriye? Of course, my grandfather couldn't manage to console her. They threw her into the sea. How did they throw her into the sea? She said, pulling her hands together as if to say Bahru. Women gathered around trash saying, okay. Her name was Nazife. May God give patience, they said. And like this, we boarded the ship as 3 girls and 1 boy. And arrived here as 2 girls and 1 boy.
When all these difficult conditions are left behind, just as everything seems to have ended, as they are about to take a sigh of relief, a brand new struggle for life begins in their new homeland. For the exchanges, the languages they brought with them are a significant obstacle to holding on to life in their new places of residence. While it constitutes a challenge, on the other hand, the longing ignited in their hearts by leaving behind their centuries-old memories often becomes an incurable wound. For them,
our mayor had called, he showed in court why ours learned Greek. They were living in a place where there were more Greeks. That's why they learned Greek.
For example, there are those coming from the village of Langaza, the village of Drama, and the village of Nazlic. These people do not know Greek. But my father, because he lived among the Greeks, knew Greek exceptionally well. They spoke it as if it were their native language. He had learned it there as a child.
Then in our neighborhood, our elders all knew Greek. We got along very well with our neighbors. We talked and interacted so much that our elders later didn't know Turkish. We visited each other like very good friends. Our home was open. We never had a locked door, that is.
I mean, my grandmother Nika, my mother, my uncle, all of them, especially my grandmother Nika, didn't know Turkish at all. They always spoke Greek. They spoke Greek at home.
I was saying, you've come all the way here, why don't you speak Turkish? You know, we could help you out. She didn't know. I mean, we struggled a lot, but unfortunately, she never learned Turkish. Well, at 70 years old, she passed away. My grandmother.
With my mom and dad. We brought this up, you know. My mom and dad are in this house. They both talk there. We then, oh baby, what do they talk about next to us? Let's find out. I learned a bit from my grandmother. I mean, a little bit. I learned, you know, I learned about bread, water, running away, eating, sitting, all from my grandmother. I couldn't fully learn the language.
Only my grandmother and grandfather were coming while they were talking. I don't fully know a word or two from them. I mean, I can't speak.
Well, I don't really know Greek songs or anything, just a couple that I picked up from my grandmother. Greek songs.
Only my mother didn't know Turkish. She didn't go to school there. Since she didn't go, she had a Greek friend named Stereo, a very close friend. She would always play with her daughter every day. Of course, after we came from there, we were here. Born in 1940. We would go to school, we would go to primary school, we would study in Turkish, come home and speak Greek. Mother didn't know.
The three of us went to middle school, to Silivri Middle School. We went. And that year, all three of us failed the class. As I mentioned earlier, they said something in Greek. To me, I was at a loss for words again. I couldn't speak at school. Out of embarrassment, I don't know what, I felt a sense of inferiority within myself.
He didn't teach us to speak, and we didn't want to learn, so they found us strange. Because we know Greek, he didn't want to learn. The younger generation.
For example, I make my grandchildren count up to 20 now. I have a little grandchild, for instance. Grandma, you speak a foreign language, for example. How do you speak it? I tell my husband, for instance, I gave money to the children, patrosia. For example, patrosia, oh, my grandma spoke a foreign language.
My father used to go there. A few friends would go to mow with a scythe. How should I say, a hot place like Aradana? He would go there, and they would drink pekim with the scythe. My late father here, while mowing with the scythe, Larsa. The beginnings like this would remind him of that place.
My parents really wanted it. They always used to say, if only we could go and see the places where our mother and father lived, but they couldn't go at that time.
I said, Mom, do you want to go? I do, my son. Of course I do. She says, it always appears in my dreams there. Get up, let me take you. Well, what should I do now? Get up, Mom, let's go. I said, thank God we have everything. Well, let's go. Well, we couldn't go, right?
He had always imagined that place, especially my father's father. He always wanted, girl, take me there. We were very young. So it's fair to say he passed away with his eyes open.
Indeed, in our conversations with these exchanges, I haven't come across a single one who didn't cry. They all cried the memories they left behind, the horse cart they left, the horses they left, the ox, the barn, the threshing floor, the garden, the house. Those who talked about the stove in their house, they called it a hearth. Let's call it a fireplace, now with its modern name. those who talked about them. Always these things. When you looked at their faces, I could see that drama on their faces. I could feel both the drama on their faces and the pain in their hearts.
When they became melancholic, they would start, of course, imagining that place and singing. With those songs, they would tell about their experiences. Actually, they would call it a song and cry with sorrows.
I am a third generation exchangee. I only know the graves of 2 generations. 3, 4, there's nothing beyond that. So, we always have a part of us in those lands.
The longing. There, I can describe from my aunt like this. Now, I just mentioned the name of our house. She built a 3-story house. My aunt said we built such a beautiful house. Pidum. She built such a beautiful house. Pidum. We couldn't live in it. They lived there for 13 years. They count it as if they never lived there.
We went there. There is a Greek woman from Sivas. When they said the Turks have come, the woman came out, an old woman. She came out, entered inside. Who, she asked, came from Turkey? We came. From where, we asked? Where did you come from? We said we came from Istanbul. I also came, she said. From Sivas, she said. Even that woman misses Sivas so much. Have you ever gone from there? How is my hometown, she says. The people there, they feel the real effects. Would ours never feel it? Do I have a principle for this? No. They also truly feel it. Hometown. But there's nothing to be done. In the face of necessity, you will reside where you are.
The conclusion I have reached is that they did not want to pass on the psychological distress of the exchange to the new generation because they were satisfied with their new homeland. They were content in their new homeland.
For example, as my father said, my father passed away in the year 70. Our area here is a nice place for about a year.
They said that place is beautiful. But I told Dad, I said, Dad, do you miss your village? Do you want to go? He said. He laughed. He said, son, Kamilova is 10 times more beautiful than Plajonsus. The lands are 10 times more fertile. What would I miss about it? He said. I grew up there in fear of the Greeks, he said.
No, they were in a state of hatred. There's no such thing as missing that place because of the hardships they endured.
Only the sufferings and hardships my father endured in Greece. He would forbid us from mentioning their names whenever he remembered them. When he got older, he wanted to see those places.
While some of the exchanges do not hesitate to express their longings, others refrain from passing on the difficulties they experienced to future generations. Most of the time, they want to endure the pain in their hearts to help their children adapt to their new homeland and new lives and to look to the future with confidence in the motherland. On the other hand, forgetting their roots is not something they agree with. Never. They make a point of continuing the cultures, customs, foods, and all ways of life they brought with them, just as they learned from their elders.
The greatest treasure we brought from there is the languages, foods, the cultures, folk dances, lullabies, rhymes, proverbs, from henna nights to circumcision weddings that they placed inside a chest. From the birth of a child to the point of death. All kinds of customs and traditions. It was brought here inside the chest we mentioned earlier.
Let's not be like Met Etmak. Our food culture was strong and good. Food was prepared for us at our weddings. Today, you wouldn't eat those dishes in a restaurant. No.
You roll out the dough, make the filling thin. After rolling out the dough, you also put walnuts in between. We used to make it plain. It can also have walnuts after rolling it out, like this in between. A rolling pin It should be a thick rolling pin for that. You scrunch it up like this, scrunch it, fold it in half like this. You arrange them in rows like that. Then you pour sugary syrup over it, cook it, and eat it. We still make them, you know.
Leek with quince and meat. Have you ever eaten it? Well, for example, leek diced meat, quince, vinegar. Adding its oil, paste, and tomato juice, cook all of these without adding any water. On the lowest heat, there used to be braziers. Now, by cooking it on the smallest burner for an hour, the flavor of the vegetable is infused into the dish. Priest stew. Have you ever eaten it? With small pearl onions. That also includes quince. Sour plum is added. That one also has meat, for example. That's another one of our dishes.
I'm chopping the green part of my leek. I add some rice. I add an egg. Then I saute it with onions. I mix everything together on top and roll out the dough. I pour it in the middle. I put dough on top as well.
Our meals were very good. I don't mean to boast, but our meals, not everyone can make them. Others, I don't know, they just don't make them. Most of them learned from our meals here. They don't know, they don't cook, but our culture is there. We had a lot of food culture there.
Very nice, we have dessert. There is a dessert called dilme. When you make it well, you wouldn't trade it for any other dessert.
My mom makes the best dilme. She used to make it the best here. We used to send lunch from home to the workers in the fields every noon because my mom made these patiote pastries and dilmes so well. Honestly, people would come to work in the fields without even being called.
We would also saute the onions and the rice. If we made pilaf, we would add tomato paste. We would cook it with meat broth. We would cook it on the lid. There were no such ovens. We would burn the lid.
The interesting thing is, small meatballs are made in the shape of marbles, fried, placed in garlic yogurt, and served after dessert. Everyone takes 1 or 2 spoonfuls so it doesn't feel too sweet. This is very interesting.
Baklava is ours, not theirs. Their dessert, slicing, you roll out the dough, they make it here. But our patisseries make it. Inside it, they pour something made from sugar. Dilme is their dessert. But baklava is not there. I bring that baklava, all the Greeks come to me saying, welcome. Even that priest comes to me in his official car.
Our main traditional tarhana, the one we learned from our mothers, we would knead it in the evening, spread it out in the morning, dry it, and let it rest. But later on, our neighbors found ours to be very sweet. Because it was sweet, we extended it to a week. For a week, we knead it in the morning, knead it in the evening, knead it in the morning, and in the evening. After a week, we would spread it out and then dry it. We would put everything into it, onions, tomatoes, everything, peppers, everything as well, while kneading it into the dough. That's how
we kneaded it from the evening, for example. For a week or 10 days, we kneaded it every morning. As we kneaded it, it would rise like this. After that, small pieces were made, and sheets were spread in the garden, like this on rugs. We would make them into small pieces and roll them, those, for example. We sifted them through sieves. We still continue doing it. We learned it from the elders like that. We are continuing their traditions. We got used to it from the elders by observing them. We still continue with them.
At that time, there were no separate dishes on the plates. In the morning, a tray of tarhana with milk. We would eat that to the field.
My grandmother was already a cook. I mean here, now in this area, in the past. Weddings used to have meals. More, probably, the dishes my grandmother made were delicious. I don't know. When they were going to have a wedding, they would say, I will hire you as a cook. When are you free? Accordingly, they say, let me also arrange things. She would say, for example, this week I'm busy, next week I'm free, and they would set the wedding date accordingly. They would ask my grandmother first.
For example, when asking for the daughter's hand, they would ask the eldest person in that family. They would ask him for her. You know, before the father, the grandfathers would come and they would ask him for the daughter. And the intermediary with the girl would be the uncle or the aunt of the house. The father doesn't directly ask the girl, like, do you want it or not? Like that. They would act as the emissaries. They would bring the news to the father and decide by saying, yes, the girl wants it.
Our wedding meals, we had very large tables, even at my wedding. They would bring the sacrificial animal to us with drums to the bride's side. They would bring it to us, the bride's side. We would give them sweets on a tray.
And there was a blessing, a breaking of abundance. Everyone was helping each other. The man who was having a wedding didn't face so much hardship, didn't experience so much trouble. Neighbors were baking bread in the ovens. Trays of baklava were coming, pastries were coming. So weddings were quite something, lasting 3 days and 3 nights.
Especially at henna nights. They would go to the bride's side. The groom's mother would place gold on the henna in the palm of her hand, as far as I remember. After that, they would also bring baklava and such. The groom's side to the bride's side, and the bride's side in a fun way with music. They would reciprocate. I mean, that's what I remember. A week before henna is applied to the girl's hair, the groom's side brings the bath sets, henna and dry fruits. They wash the henna, applied to her hair and feet, in the bath. The henna to be applied to her hands is done 3 days before the wedding. Another thing, you know, that happens separately.
Giving a gift, in Greek, it is responded to with horola. Everyone asks for something from that one relative. That person either gives money or something else. It was like that, accompanied by music and dancing. Our weddings were very different.
For example, when it's a patriotic occasion, both sides, the girl's side and the boy's side, go to get sweets with drums. For example, they would say, for instance, you ask Ahmet Mehmet for a gift, everyone would give something as a tradition. They would sing its song, its folk song.
You indeed bring the gift. You truly bring the gift. Kemal Effendi, as always, without fail.
Don't say it. I don't know his song. So he comes, huh? And now, you, for example, guest, the brother of the wedding host, or sister, whatever, they would ask for a gift. So when they were taking a gift from us, they took out our donkey from the barn.
We were children back then. They wouldn't often let us into weddings. We would buy a tray of sweets on the streets. All the children would gather in the evening and eat it. In other words, there was harmony, there was friendship, there was brotherhood. In other words, everyone would smile. We are buying dessert. I never forget with Brother Hilmi. Look, years, centuries have passed. The echoes from the stairs of that wedding house are spreading over us.
And the first sign that the bride had arrived at the groom's house was a good news pillow and 2 kerosene lamps. Whoever delivered them to the groom would receive a tip from him.
The cars they came with arrived. They even took them from their cars. As we arrived.
I am here, at home. They have taken the bride. Of course, I went. At that time, there wasn't. He wouldn't go to the wedding. Where is the wedding? With drums, zurnas. Cars, there were no buses back then. With trucks, open trucks. They rented a car for the bride. The others came in open cars. They ate there, then came back here and ate again here. Our weddings used to be very beautiful.
It would happen inside. It would be hidden from the men. The women would gather in a place like a store all together. Honestly, they would even close the windows out of fear. They would cover them with newspapers so the men wouldn't look.
Back in the day, we used to do it for 2 or 3 days. Drums, food, coffee, other drinks, butter. It was like that.
Weddings back then are nothing compared to weddings now. They would serve food, there would be music playing, a henna night, entertainment, tables. It's quite inappropriate to say, but tables would be set up. In other words, the gatherings were grand.
We noticed a single common point among the immigrants, not only from Thessaloniki but also from Naslic, Drama, Langaza, Gevgeri, or many regions of Greece. During all these interviews we conducted with them, it was that they all proudly claimed to be from Thessaloniki, in a common language, to not let anyone take away the pride of being fellow townsmen with our great leader, Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Finally, let's listen to what the glorious fellow townsmen of our great leader think about him.
Atatürk, 1936. Did he come here in 1936 or 1937? But this road was the only one. I mean, this road didn't exist. There was the other road. On the road going from the old bridge, he came here in disguise with a few people accompanying him. That's how he came to the sports field from there. This coffee house, this is the place you see now where Atatürk sat. The place you see here. He sat right next to that well.
What we know is that from time to time when Atatürk comes to the Florya Pavilion, he leaves the Florya Pavilion. He even sneaks away. Toçakmaklı towards Kumburgaz, but the place he visits most is Kalikratya, because the place is very beautiful. He sits here. There is Kafir A. He chats with him. He drinks his coffee, drinks his tea.
Our neighbor was employing a neighbor. When it was time to have coffee, there was Uncle Kafir. I know that man. That man offered the coffee to Atatürk.
Ataturk came here to my father's cafe and drank coffee.
When Atatürk heard that Mimar Sinan was coming, our great grandmothers would start baking bread early from the oven. They were going to serve breakfast to Atatürk.
Atatürk came, I was 9 years old. My brother grabbed my arm, we went to Mimar Sinan. Basakokrem. The village women brought bread, they brought salmon bread. He kissed that bread 3 times like this.
They asked, "How are you?" Atatürk asked them, "How are you? Are you well? Are you comfortable?" "We are comfortable," he said. "Thank goodness, but do you have any issues?" he said. One of them said, "Our lands are few," he said.
You brought us here. Salt water, are not suitable here. Our children drown in the sea. We will starve here. Give us to the forest. We were raising goats and sheep there. Let's do the same here.
Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was a Balkan native. He knew the Balkan spirit. He was aware of the Turkish labor in the Balkans. To ensure these people could establish themselves and strengthen in Turkey, he took the necessary initiative. For instance, he directed the Balkan people who did not know how to use the sea, and the settlers in coastal areas towards the sea. He dedicated them to various agricultural fields.
I have brought you to such a place that, look, there are unlimited tapas-free places. Any place you want is yours. Not all of you should do farming. Look, there's fishing, I don't know. Engage with the sea and so on.
I want to tell what my father told. While my friends were working on a construction job at Atatürk's mansion, Atatürk would greet us from his mansion and return our greetings. He was humble, they say. This doesn't leave my mind, he tells it to everyone.
You're 9 years old, right? We're big, guys, you know. The man with hazel eyes. Such a man won't come, you know.
I saw Atatürk. Atatürk stopped by the Çırpıcı streams. When he passed through Çatalca, he stopped by the Çırpıcı streams. Atatürk.
Atatürk's name was there, and so was he. There's no one else like Atatürk, no one. You were one of a kind. May he rest in peace.
There are people today who fear Atatürk's death. That's the state we're in. Atatürk is our crown jewel. He gifted this homeland to us amidst great struggles. The other spent 15 years in power. I mean, as a leader. The rest of his time was spent in wars. He is our... I cannot explain it. I mean, I can't fit it into words.
They instilled it in us so deeply, our mothers and fathers, that when we remember Atatürk, our eyes fill with tears. We grew up with him, and hopefully we will die with him. We are Atatürk's children, all of us. Our children are the same. We are always by Atatürk's side. I always pray for him. May God have mercy on him. He saved our country. We came here and found peace.
Do you know what I'm thinking? Our lands really need it. Let the soil of Salas produce, let such an Atatürk emerge. Nowadays, these lands really need it.
Today marks the 100th anniversary of our republic and the 100th year in the matter of the population exchange. The year has now begun with 2023. First, I commemorate the founding of our republic and Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and his comrades with gratitude and respect. The population exchange is a reality, but an even more important reality is the ashes of the vanished Ottoman Empire, a nation with a disbanded army and nothing left. Rising up, gathering around their leader under the leadership of the national forces, the transformation of the Republic of Turkey into a nation state and the 100th anniversary of our republic, celebrating it today in its 100th year is the greatest reality for us.
I am proud to be a fellow countryman of Atatürk. Wherever I go, I always understand Atatürk. I'm glad he existed.
I attribute the loyalty of the exchangees to Atatürk, to the feeling of being compatriots, yes, but the main thing is the transition from a life of captivity there to their new homeland, their free lives and their new lands here.
Atatürk, what should they say? We are complete Atatürkists, that's it. What Atatürk means to me comes before even my father. Because if Atatürk hadn't given us women's rights as women, look, now my body shivers. As women, we need to pray to Atatürk more than men do. He gave us even what our fathers couldn't. He gave us the right to vote and be elected. Equal shares in property with our siblings, with our brothers. What more could he give us?
Who saved our Turkey? Who brought us to this era? If only a man or a family would come forward. If only someone would come forward. If only they could make us more beautiful. If only...
There can be a prime minister anywhere in the world, but a world-class leader, he said an Atatürk emerges. There is no leader, no one above him, above Atatürk. Won't another man like Atatürk come? No other man like Atatürk will come in the world. We are their grandchildren of Atatürk.